guys, Merry Christmas Eve. Today I wanted to go over some Japanese terms that are specifically Japanese. They're not found in the English language. And this is really cool because they describe some really interesting things that really exemplify the Japanese culture. So let's jump in with food stuff first. All right, the first one is called wagashi. Now, wagashi is basically the term for traditional Japanese snacks. Usually they're made out of mochi, which is pulverized rice, and it's made into like this chewy type thing. And then they usually fill it with red bean paste. And it comes in all different shapes and forms. A lot of it has become kind of an art. You can look on Instagram, there's so many accounts that use wagashi as their main thing, and they can get so intricate and beautiful, and I totally recommend if you go to Japan, search out a wagashi shop and try one. The next term is washoku, and washoku is basically traditional Japanese food that is seasonal. Now, the Japanese are really into having things correlate with their surroundings, and one form of that is their food. So they use a lot of seasonal ingredients, and they use a lot of traditional foods and manner of making those foods. So that's washoku. We discovered the term when we were watching NHK, and they have a lot of cooking programs, so it's something that you might want to check out. This one is a little bit morbid, but harikiri and seppuku, which basically means the same thing, is taking your own life by way of a special sword or blade, and that is done. I don't really think it's done anymore, but it was practiced basically because you have done something so shameful or you have been so incorrect that it is worthy of killing yourself. That was definitely something that happened back in the samurai day. When they dishonored themselves, they would kill themselves. It's an interesting thing. I know in a lot of American society we say harikiri, which is totally not the correct pronunciation of it, but that's kind of how we say it. And it's interesting because it's a term that has transcended Japan into other cultures and people know what it means. Seppuku, I don't think many people have heard that in contrast with harikiri. It's uniquely Japanese. That's why I brought it up. I don't think anybody should do it, but you know. Now this one is a really beautiful term. I actually really like it, and it's something that we don't have a term for in the American language, and it is something that I think we all kind of look at in awe of, and that's the reflection through the trees. And in Japanese they say komorebi, and I'm probably pronouncing that really incorrectly, but that basically means the sunlight through the trees and the space that is between the sunlight and the trees. And that kind of invokes very beautiful imagery. I think most of us can agree that when we see the sunlight through the trees, it's kind of that like warm, beautiful feeling that you get. And so I think that's really cool that they have a word for that. I'm gonna say this totally wrong and I apologize, but shinrin-yoku means basically bathing in the forest light. And that I think is in terms of the color. So I don't know if you guys have ever been in a forest, but if you haven't, you should go to one and check this out. But when the light comes through the leaves, but it's not actually breaking through the leaves, there's just kind of like this canopy of green surrounding you. There is this interesting warmth that you're getting from the sunlight, but also this like cool green foresty feeling that you get from being within the leaves in the forest surrounding you. It's hard to describe, but obviously the Japanese have come up with a word to describe it, which is really cool. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about, and if you don't, you need to go to a forest and just like sit in it, I guess, and be one with nature or something. Now the next term is something I've heard before, and I guess we kind of have terms for it or a combination of terms, but it's called Wabi-sabi, which basically means quiet melancholy or the loneliness within, which I think is something that you experience a lot with Japanese art. And then there's also, I don't know, I think the Japanese have, I don't really know how to describe the Japanese way of feeling about things. Sometimes it's not as joyful or as excited as maybe Western cultures get about things. It's a little more solemn and introspective, and so wabi-sabi is one of those terms. This is one that if you are an anime person or you watch any sort of Japanese programming, when they're talking about food or whenever you see people eat, they always say itadakimasu, and that basically means I humbly receive. So it's basically a polite way of receiving food or giving thanks for the food that is before you. A lot of Western cultures have religion, and so they usually pray or they usually say like, thanks God for this food or something like that. It's sort of along those lines without the religious connotation with it. Okay, so the next word we have have a similar term for it in the English language, and that's nostalgia or nostalgic. But the word in Japanese is natsukashi or natsukashi. There's two I's at the end, so it's like a longer I sound. But I've heard people talk about it, and it's basically when you're recalling something that is no longer there or something from your past. Like I remember my mother when she used to make cookies for me on my birthday, but also can be referring to something that is just in the past that is very reminiscent of fond memories. So natsukashi, I think, is kind of what people say. It's like warm and fuzzy. It's a Japanese word, so it's kind of hard to explain in English terms, but that's the word. Okay, and the next one is also food related, and I feel like this basically sums up my life, and that's kui daore, and that basically means you are broke from eating and drinking. Now, I don't drink, but I definitely eat my way through life, and I love it. It's so much fun. It's something that definitely brings me joy. One of the reasons that my boyfriend and I like traveling is because we want to have that food experience in those other cultures. Kui daore basically sums that up. Like, we are broke. Like, when we look at our bank statements, we're like, oh my gosh, we spent that much on food and nothing else? What is wrong with us? But I think a lot of people can relate, and obviously the Japanese people can relate because they have a special word for it. Another word that I think I've heard so often in Japanese programming is shogunai, and shogunai basically means it can't be helped. And we obviously have it can't be helped in English, or we have like it is what it is type of thing, but that's basically shogunai, and I've heard that so many times in Japanese programming conversations in anime and things like that. I think this word and then the word I'm going to talk about next are used quite frequently within the Japanese language. It's kind of like, yeah, when we in America where we say, yeah, well, you know, it is what it is, or, you know, but life goes on type of thing. This word, shogunai, and then the next word, yappari, they're used so frequently within Japanese conversation. So that brings me to my next one, yappari. Yappari is something that I always hear when I'm listening to Japanese programs again, and I've even heard it within Japanese conversation with people, like when we've been in Japan a couple of times, you overhear and you pick out words that you recognize, and yappari, definitely one of them. And yappari basically means like, oh, that's what I thought, or I thought that's what it was, or oh, I knew that's what you were gonna say. And we were actually, before we went to Japan the first time, we watched a lot of programs on Japanese etiquette and being a foreigner in Japan, and just trying to learn and find out as much as we could about the culture. And one of the programs we watched was about foreigners living in Japan, and they were saying like the biggest thing they hated about Japan was yappari. And I think it's just because it's a colloquialism that in America, if we said that, we would sound like a know-it-all, but in Japan, it's definitely more something that they say quite frequently. So I hope you guys found this list of interesting terms that are specific to Japan interesting. I sure did. I've heard of a lot of these before I looked up other phrases to make this list a little bit longer. I'll also put down my source where I got a lot of these words from in the description box below. If you know of any other terms or words or commonalities that happen in Japan that are specific to Japan, please put them below. I know a couple of you guys will have those because you guys are awesome with the Japanese knowledge, and so I appreciate that. So look in the comments box below to see more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, and follow me on Instagram if you want. That's pretty much what I'm most prevalent on, but I will see you guys on the next video, and you guys have a wonderful and happy Christmas, and I'll see you next time. And then on a similar note, there is the term shinrin. Oh, I can't say it. Shinrin yoku. Meh.